Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron, Alor20A6. By the way, if you are a patron, you'll be getting our new shipment of pins this coming month, probably, depending on how the Postal Service treats us.
Yeah. So you got some cool stuff coming up. If you're interested, patreon.com/humanechoes.
Today's bad idea is another weird weapon, and we don't do enough of these, Tony. A lot of these, in my opinion, don't have enough documentation to really cover as in-depth as I'd like to, but I was able to do some digging and find out quite a bit about the bat bomb.
See, whenever you said bat bomb, I wasn't sure if it was a weapon or if it was like some weird thing that they'd throw into caves to get bats not to be in there. Like, I really didn't know what you were referring to.
Well, I am happy to be able to illuminate your darkness, Tony. Dr. Lytle S. Adams was with the bats when the war started. He was on vacation in Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico when he heard the news that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor and the United States was entering World War II. Now, Carlsbad Caverns is a massive cave complex, and it's home to nearly 1 million bats. And in those bats, Lytle saw a way to strike back at the Japanese and bring the war to a decisive and bloodless end.
So the bats carried the nuclear bomb.
Don't get to the end of the story before I get there, Tony. We all know how World War II ends, okay? We all had it in high school. So Lytle's idea, using bats, he would take up the cloak of the bat and strike fear into the criminals of Gotham. No, that's a different story. No, he envisioned using bats to carry tiny incendiary bombs all over Japan. And how this would work was the bat would have the bomb strapped to it somehow. He would fly off from where he was dropped from a plane overhead. He would look for somewhere to rest, which would probably be under the eaves of a house or in some little crook of some attic, just any place where the bat could get. And then the bomb would go off and it would start a fire. And if you had a lot of these, it would start a bunch of fires simultaneously, burning down a bunch of Japanese villages. They wouldn't be able to put them all out in time, and this would severely hamper the Japanese's ability to continue forward with the war.
Yeah, just destroy infrastructure and get rid of morale and all sorts of things.
And it's not even the craziest idea on its face, right? Like, the bat part is weird, but at the time, Japanese houses were built using a lot of wood and a lot of paper in their walls, right? Like, even this late in their history, there was not necessarily solid construction so much, especially in sort of your more residential type areas. It would just be paper and wood and kind of something to keep people from seeing what you were doing, but they weren't, at least according to what I read in the story and what Dr. Lytle thought, they weren't these heavy-duty structures, so they would be very susceptible to fires if they could get them started.
I mean, I can't even imagine how fast those things would burn, too.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of movies where they have, the paper walls. I never considered what would happen if one of those caught on fire. I assume it has happened, right? I mean, because fire is a thing in human civilization, but that I just don't know what that would even look like. The other thing that's not as crazy as it might sound is using bats to begin with. And the reason that bats are relatively good for this job is because once you drop the temperature low enough, bats start to hibernate. So if you want to transport massive amounts of bats over to another place and not have to worry about how do we feed them, where are they going to be pooping, why would we want bats flying around inside of our airplane, all of those things are basically solved because all you have to do is put them in a cooler with some ice, they'll go to sleep, and then when you need them, you can wake them up and have them do their thing.
Just imagining a giant, B-52 bomber dumping a bunch of coolers of bats out and hoping that they come out of hibernation before they hit the ground.
Oh, man, Tony. We almost had it for real. Let's get there, though. So, Dr. Lytle spends about a month thinking about this and drawing up a proposal, and he sends an official, drawn-up plan of how his bat bombs are going to work to the military. Now, lots of people were coming up with lots of crazy ideas at this time about ways that we could win the war, but Lytle Adams had an in at the White House. He had personally flown with Eleanor Roosevelt while demonstrating another idea of his, which was a scheme for a plane to be able to pick up and deliver mail to a ship without landing. The president's wife knows this guy, and when he calls her up and says, "Hey, I've got this idea about some bat bombs," she gives him the okay. She says, "Yeah, you guys need to listen." And President Roosevelt himself personally okayed the Army Chemical War Service to move ahead with developing the bat bomb idea. He said, quote, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but it is worth looking into," end quote.
It also sounds like a lot less research cost than many of the other things we were looking at during World War II. So it's like, just take a shot in the dark.
Well, you say that, Tony, but the next part of this plan was actually a ton of research. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to have a bat carry a bomb, and it's going to blow up, and it's going to hurt a lot of houses. But you have to know which bat that you're going to use. And that wasn't as easy a solution as it might seem when you just first start thinking about it. Because you need to have a bat that's reasonably good at lifting some weight other than its own, and there also have to be enough of them to be used on a mass scale, because you're not getting your bats back after you've blown them up.
Yeah, it's a one-time use deal.
Yeah. So Lytle Adams goes on the road looking for the perfect bat. And later he said, quote, "We visited 1,000 caves and 3,000 mines. Speed was so imperative that we generally drove all day and night when we weren't exploring caves. We slept in the cars, taking turns driving. One car in our search team covered 350,000 miles.
That's a lot of mileage for a single car. Holy crap.
Yeah, especially in the space of just a few months, right? They don't have a lot of time to do this. They need to get the right bat. And the biggest bat they found was the Mastiff Bat, which was a species with a 20-inch wingspan that could carry up to a pound in flight. But the downside to the Mastiff was there weren't enough of them to use at the scale that Dr. Adams envisioned. Instead, they settled on the free-tailed bat, a smaller animal weighing only 1/3 of an ounce, but capable of flying while carrying 3 times its own body weight. And, more importantly, there was lots of them.
Free-tailed bat. I have never heard of that one.
Apparently, there's a lot of different kinds of bats, Tony.
Yeah, there's a lot of different species. They're all fascinating, too. Such a weird little mammal.
When the testing began, it quickly became clear that there were still some problems that had to be worked out. These surgical clips that the scientists used to attach the bombs to the bats often tore right through their skin, and the containers holding the bats sometimes didn't open. And when they did open, the bats that were inside the containers often didn't fly away quickly enough with their payload before slamming into the ground.
Okay, so they pretty much did the thing I was thinking.
Yep. Yeah, they did actually drop coolers full of bats out of airplanes, and they just thudded into the desert, which is a negative result in your experiment.
Yeah, a parachute could have helped that. Or maybe just taking the ice out.
I'm sure that there was more to it than that, Tony. I'm, of course, trivializing this. A, because I don't have the specifics directly in front of me, and B, because it's funny. But no, they had smart people working on this. They weren't a bunch of idiots just like, "Oh no, why didn't they wake up, Cletus? Well, y'all didn't take the ice out of the cooler, Rufus." It wasn't those guys, okay? They have some smart people trying to make this work. After tweaking these variables, the Army had more success getting the bat bombs to work as intended. Unfortunately, that success involved the bats roosting under a fuel tank at an airfield and setting it ablaze. They also, and this part to me is just hopelessly ironic, accidentally destroyed a model Japanese village that the army used for training. And in what was definitely the final straw, 2 bat bombs accidentally destroyed the general's car at the base where they were doing the testing. After this, the army passed the project to the Navy.
I could almost see a general being like, well, it was effective in destroying my car, so it's obviously going to do damage elsewhere.
This was my favorite thing about this story, Tony. I think the idea that the army had this failure up to and including the general's car getting blown up, and their response was, you Navy guys seem like you could use technology like this. Here you go. The Navy gets a hold of this, and they do take it seriously. They rename it Project X-Ray for reasons that are completely beyond me. And they continue with the testing of this project. There are more promising results, and as the Army had already proven, the bats with their bombs were capable of starting fires. One Navy observer wrote, quote, "A reasonable number of destructive fires can be started in spite of the extremely small size of the units. The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structure without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered." But tuning that capacity for maximum destruction was eating up more and more manpower and money. And in 1944, the Fleet Admiral canceled the project after hearing that it likely would not be ready for deployment until 1945. The project at this point had cost $2 million. And even if it had succeeded as well as Dr. Adams had hoped, there was little point in proceeding because in late 1944 and into 1945, the Army Air Force carried out the bombing of Tokyo. Now, this is not the dropping of the atomic bomb. This is the firebombing of Tokyo, and this just used conventional exploding bombs, and in this bombing, they destroyed 16 square miles of the city and killed 100,000 people, leaving over 1 million homeless. It was the deadliest bombing raid in history, and it went on for months. And if you know your history of World War II, you know that even after all of this punishment, the Japanese still were not ready to surrender. And this is the paradoxical nature of this bad idea. I came into this expecting to find out that it was just dumb to think that bats could carry bombs or that this could be effective in any way. It turns out, no, bats are exactly as effective as Dr. Lytle Adams initially envisioned, and they probably would have done, with some more tuning, exactly what he hoped that they would to the Japanese.
And it probably would have had less civilian casualties because it wasn't as violent of a bombing.
It definitely would have. In fact, that was the point that Adams made later. He said, listen, if you'd have used my method, you might not have killed as many people. The problem is, the Japanese were able to withstand this massive amount of firebombing without giving up. Their will to continue with the war likely would not have been broken even if the bat bomb had been as successful as Lytle Adams had envisioned it being.
And you have the whole thing where it's like intolerable animal cruelty, but during that war it really didn't matter. You just had to win.
I would have taken animal cruelty over the deaths of both Japanese and American people, Tony. If it had worked like he saw it, I'm down to kill some bats.
It is a cruel thing, but it is a very effective thing if it would have been implemented a little better.
And the truth is, as good as this was, it simply wouldn't have been enough to end the war. That could only be accomplished by another kind of new bomb, a bomb powered not by bats, but by the raw power of the atom.
So the next time you see a bat flying around your house, understand that it might have gotten taken up by Ted Kaczynski and you could have a full-on Unabomber bat bomb.
Understand that it can lift 3 times its own body weight, too, which is one of those things you hear about
like
bugs.
Flying. Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, an ant can pick up like a bunch more than its body weight, whatever. You don't think about bats up there toting around 3 times more than they actually weigh and continuing to flap their wings. That's impressive.
It's like I could poorly drag something 3 times my weight for a little bit, but that's about it.
Right, these guys are fly. Now, they didn't probably fly as well as they would have. We're getting into the weeds here, Tony. The point is, the bat bombs was a fun idea that didn't actually hurt anybody. So we can have fun with it.
Just a few cars. Yes.
It's nice when we get to talk about these military projects that failed, and it's like, nobody got hurt. Some 4-star general had his car blown up, and that's funny, and then he sent it to the Navy. That'll do it for this week, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this, you should subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you really love us, you should check us out over on Patreon at patreon.com/humanechoes, where at the $5 level, you can receive the brand new pin that we're going to be sending out. It is a secret until the members receive it.
Yep.
My lips are sealed. It's going to be cool.
Bye, everybody.